from your perspective, and this is really a big question, what can happen if Vladimir Putin declines the best case Trump's offer on Ukraine? If Vladimir Putin would be demonstrated, revealed as a no man, if he's a no man on the international stage after negotiations with Donald Trump, what can happen?
Well, that's again another interesting question. Putin is increasingly isolated. There's an international arrest warrant out for him, so he can't leave Russia to any country that would carry out that Interpol red notice request to arrest him. His isolation will continue. I think what will happen when I think he will refuse Donald Trump's initial design for peace, because he's greedy. He will want more territory, and he will not want any security guarantees for Ukraine. The commentary that we're hearing out of Lavrov and out of Peskov is just reinforcing the fact that Russia just wants to take more and more and more. And Russia will use that to try and build up their military capability again if there's any ceasefire, so that they're ready to restart the conflict at some stage. But I think what Trump will do is he will give Putin one or two chances, and then he will send him a very clear message. I think that very clear message will be sent in a number of different ways. It'll be sent economically, and that would be affecting the global oil price. I think Trump will set the conditions for the global oil price to drop dramatically, and he'll send it militarily by giving Ukraine access to an awful lot more weaponry and longer range weaponry, and taking the restrictions that are currently on the use of some of the weapons away. And he might even go one step further and try and push Europe and other NATO members to support protecting part of Ukraine, not getting directly involved in the front line, but allowing, and we've heard comments coming out of the French president and the British Secretary of State for Defence, you talking about potentially putting troops into part of Ukraine to allow Ukraine to free up those troops that are trying to protect the Belarus border and other areas. And NATO countries then carry out training for Ukrainian troops inside Ukraine. I think this is a very, very interesting set of messages that are coming out. So there's a number of things that Trump can do that will put an awful lot of pressure on Putin. I don't think Putin is going to give anything up, and I think that's his greatest weakness.
I just wanted to ask you about this idea of sending peacekeeping forces to Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron is pressing for a peacekeeping mission to be established, and according to Politico, 5 or even 8 European countries are ready to deploy its troops to Ukraine, but as a part of a big ceasefire deal between Ukraine and Russia. And my first question is, would it be the best case security guarantee for Ukraine if European troops are deployed to Ukraine, but without American military presence? Would it be bold enough to deter Russia from invading Ukraine again if no American troops, if there is no any troops, American troops on the ground in Ukraine, only European one? And second one, do you believe that Vladimir Putin is going to agree with European troops, but members of the European Unions, we are talking about France, Germany, Italy, they are also members of NATO. So will Vladimir Putin agree with NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. I don't think Putin will agree to that at all, and he will see it as an escalation. Could European troops, effectively NATO troops without the Americans, provide a peacekeeping force inside Ukraine? Yes, of course they can. There wouldn't be a problem with that whatsoever. The fact that if America decided not to put any troops on the ground doesn't mean that there would not be American support. The US provides some unique capabilities that NATO and European countries would rely on. Those unique capabilities capabilities are operating today in support of operations in Ukraine. So it's air tankers, it's intelligence gathering capabilities, it's special equipments that are being provided into different areas. Europe could easily put troops into Ukraine and provide that peacekeeping and stabilization force. United States support, I think, would be guaranteed. United States, of course, is looking at three conflicts around the world that the international community is asking them to deal with. We've got in Europe, Russia, Ukraine. In the Middle East, destabilizing situation across the Middle East, and we've just had the fall of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and we've got a growing tension in Southeast Asia. From an American perspective, Southeast Asia and what's happening in China and in that area is a higher political importance for the US domestically than what's going on in Europe. And I think we'll see Trump putting pressure on European nations to step up and do more when it comes to physical support in for Ukraine.
You just mentioned about Trump's demands on NATO. According to also this publication from Financial Times, Donald Trump's team will demand NATO members to spend at least 5% of their GDP on defense. Does this mean that this is really bad news for Russian dictator Vladimir Putin? Because if NATO members spend even more on defense, that would mean that Vladimir Putin would have less chances to have any kind of success in case of the attack on NATO.
Yes, well, Putin is, he's a dictator who doesn't show any logic, but he's not that stupid that he would attack NATO, because he knows that the response would be overwhelming, and it would leave him with one option, and that would be to go nuclear. And I don't think he's daft enough to go nuclear, even if he starts a conflict into a NATO country. I think we're a long way off that. Sorry, I forgot the gist of your question there.
I just asked you about the 5% of the GDP.
Oh, yes, yeah. That's it, 5%. If we look at what Trump did last time, he insisted that NATO countries spent the 2% of their GDP on defense that they had agreed to become members of NATO. Not every country in NATO does that. And when Donald Trump threatened to withdraw support for NATO or withdraw support for those countries that didn't spend the 2%, if you don't pay, we don't play, he said, then a lot of NATO countries who weren't spending that money increased their expenditure. I think when Trump gets in now, he will want NATO to step up and take on greater responsibility. And there are two figures that are being pushed around. There's 3%, and then there's the 5% you said. And I think he will come in and try and bully NATO countries to increase their spending to 3% or 5%. And that's something that I think would be right and proper, because if there is a negotiated settlement where Putin is allowed to keep any element of territory of Ukraine, even under President Zelensky's plans temporarily, then that would effectively restart a Cold War, and we'd see an Iron Curtain coming down again across Europe. Whenever we had the last Cold War, NATO countries were spending between 6 and 7% of their GDP on defense, and that's just to prepare their defensive capabilities. Defensive and offensive capabilities are even more expensive. So I think Trump will start to push that button quite hard, knowing full well, again, the businessman that he is, that a lot of people, when they spend their money, will want to buy capability from US defense industry, and therefore it's good for the US taxpayer and good for the US economy.
Let's cover also the most interesting statements from Vladimir Putin's end of the year final press conference. So Vladimir Putin said for the first time, I will quote him, when everything is calm, measured, stable, we are bored, Russian President Putin said in his answer, and this is when everyone wants action. It's really interesting statements. He was answering question about the war against Ukraine. Don't you think that Putin is trying to put the blame on the failures on the ground in Ukraine on his, for example, inner circle?
Oh, Putin will try and put the blame on anyone and everyone, and he's tried to shift the blame the whole way through the almost 3 years now that he's been carrying out his special military operation, the reinvasion of Ukraine. He's failed strategically, and he knows that he is failing tactically, even though Russia is advancing slowly in the east. The Ukrainian defense is holding Russia back, where Russia is supported by China, North Korea, Iran, and you continuing to defend that is impressive. The war is not going to be won on who fights the best tactical battle. That will set some of the conditions. The war will be won on who fights best in military planning terms, the operational level or the strategic level. The strategic level is this peace plan that Donald Trump is talking about or imposing and what's going on, and the relations with the wider international community. The operational level is dealing with Russia's ability to continue to prosecute its conflict. And Ukraine is having huge successes there, where it's destroying Russia's oil economy by attacking the oil refineries and oil storage depots, attacking the railway sites, attacking airfields, attacking military command and control structures, logistic bases, ammunition dumps. That is what is having a massive impact on Russia's ability to prosecute the war. And you put those two together, it's impacting the Russian economy. And I think through 2025, we will see the conditions for the collapse of the Russian economy, and therefore the political fallout that will cause Vladimir Putin and his inner circle. Putin will be trying to protect his position as much as he possibly can and blame everyone else. It wouldn't surprise me if we see more members of his inner circle taking up window cleaning jobs and falling out of the 9th floor window of various buildings over the next few months.
And do you think that Vladimir Putin regrets his decision to launch full-scale invasion against Ukraine?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I don't think Putin regrets anything, because I think Putin, in his own mind and his inner circle, brief him what he wants to hear, and in his own mind, he is changing the way he's thinking. He's changing his success parameters. He's changing his understanding of what's going on to suit what he wants. He doesn't live in reality, I don't think, because I think he believes genuinely that he is winning and will win from a military perspective. I suspect the reality is being withheld from him, or is being dressed up in such a way that there are solutions coming out of it. So Putin will not accept the reality of what's on the ground, and therefore I don't think he regrets it, because he won't let himself do that. I think if he could step back from himself and examine it, he would regret it if he was applying any logic. But I don't think he applies logic.
Also, we don't think that also General Gerasimov applies any kind of logic, because recently he said that his army achieved all goals set by the political leadership in 2024. What is your reaction to this?
Well, that's Gerasimov briefing Putin what Putin wants to hear. Gerasimov has failed in everything. The whole special military operation has failed. Putin launched it because he says he was concerned about the move to the west of Ukraine, and he, with President Zelensky, was getting a government in that he had lost control over, and he didn't want to see NATO expansion. Well, NATO's expanded by 2 extra countries, and is right up against Russia's border now. He tried to topple President Zelensky's government. His operation failed in that, and he had to reset, and has now set his objective as the Donbass in the east, and he still can't capture that with the whole of the Russian military. And therefore, he has failed at everything he has tried to do, and Gerasimov has failed, and all of the other military commanders have failed. Those that were showing a degree of competence at different times, he has sacked or they have had accidents. General Surin, the defenses that he has put in with the Surin lines are phenomenal. And it's because of those that the Ukrainian counteroffensive last year was blunted so quickly. But Surin disappeared. And Putin doesn't like strong generals. He likes generals who feed him the information he wants to hear, I think.
Do you think that General Surovikin supported a coup, Prigozhin's coup in Moscow? That was a reason why he was sacked by Putin.
Yeah, I think so. I think Prigozhin and Surovikin were friends, were close, and were working together, and they'd worked together quite well in the planning for the defenses. I think the coup was almost a coup by accident. I think we saw the Wagner troops marching to Moscow, but they hadn't expected to actually get 10 kilometers up the road before Putin would have negotiated and done something. And when they got close to the outskirts of Moscow, they suddenly realized that they didn't know what to do. So it'll be interesting whenever the true extent of what went on gets published at some stage in the future. But I think there was a lot made of it. But it was more Wagner stamping their feet on the ground because they had been withdrawn from Bakhmut and weren't being given anywhere else back into the front line again. And it shows the difficulties that were going on between different high-level commanders. And I think Gerasimov was one of the key individuals who caused the friction that led to all of that in the past. But it'll be interesting to see when the proper history of it's written.
Do you feel that there is a potential in Russia for another military coup in the nearest future?
I think it's very difficult for there to be a coup in Moscow. I don't see there being strong enough military commanders in Moscow, and that's why Putin doesn't keep his capable commanders around him. I think it's difficult for any of his other oligarchs to stage a coup because of the way Putin controls everything. We hear of different oligarchs or those that are close to the inner circle having accidents and falling out of windows or falling downstairs. Those are individuals who have probably turned around and suggested that it's time for Putin to go. That will create fear amongst the rest of the inner circle, and they won't know who to be able to trust and who not to trust. So it's very difficult then for a group of them to get together and try and overthrow Putin. I think if there's an economic collapse, then we might see more of a push in Russia. But it's difficult to see the circumstances of where Putin's power base is going to collapse beneath him anytime soon.
Let's cover also situation in Syria. According to the New York Times, Vladimir Putin stopped taking Bashar Assad's calls after the beginning of this big rebels offensive on Aleppo and on the capital city of Damascus. From your perspective, why did Vladimir Putin stop taking Assad calls?
I think Putin has realized that he's lost his influence in the Middle East and in the Mediterranean, with the fall of Syria, and he blames Bashar al-Assad for not keeping the Russian interests safe, as Assad will have promised to do, and Putin supported Assad to try and do that. So he sees Assad as a complete failure. I don't think he likes him personally, and I don't think he likes the potential of another dictator with access to billions of dollars sitting in Moscow for a period of time where he could potentially build up some form of resistance to Putin. So Putin didn't want Assad in Russia. He's unfortunately had to take him, but the price that Russia is paying, and we're seeing convoys going to take the last of the troops and naval capabilities away from the Russian naval base at Tartus, and to close the other airfields that Russia's using down, even though those on the ground are saying, no, we're staying. I don't think the rebels will allow Russia to maintain any capability, even if Russia tries to throw lots of money at them, because the rebels suffered under Russian aircraft and Russian bombs, and suffered from Assad and Russian support to Assad. So the Middle East is a strategic failure for Vladimir Putin. And he hasn't quite started to feel the pain of that yet. And he will be blaming, as he does with everyone, he blames someone else. He'd be blaming Bashar al-Assad, which is why I suspect he wasn't taking his phone calls.
And do you expect Bashar al-Assad to live a calm life in Moscow without any threats to his physical security?
I don't think Putin will let him have freedom inside Moscow because of the wealth that he's got, unless he can find some way of taking that wealth away from him, which he might do. But he will always keep a very careful eye on Assad. I think he'll let him live there, but under a large number of restrictions, and Russian intelligence will be monitoring what he's doing very closely indeed. And if he steps out of line, there's always an accident. Putin may have booked a heart attack for him in 2 or 3 weeks' time. We just don't know.
Also, there are some reports that Bashar al-Assad is not allowed to travel far away from Moscow, so he's not allowed to get out from Moscow. And from your perspective, how can you assess such a treatment of his former best friend in the Middle East?
Well, I think this is Putin, not wanting him there in the first place. Will keep restrictions on him, knowing full well that Bashar al-Assad, you can't leave Russia because he's got nowhere else really to go to, and Putin will want to keep tight restrictions on him, so that he doesn't become a threat to Putin, a focal point for any other growing political movement that there is in the future. So effectively, he will keep him under an element of not necessarily house arrest, but city arrest. And Russian intelligence services will be monitoring his communications, monitoring his movements, and monitoring those who visit him very, very closely indeed.
Also, according to the New York Times, the closest aides and allies of Bashar al-Assad felt betrayed because they didn't know even about the evacuation of Bashar al-Assad from Syria. So betrayal is a usual thing for dictators. Don't you think so?
Oh, very much so. Dictators look after themselves, and it was quite clear that Bashar al-Assad had a well-rehearsed evacuation program for him and his immediate family, and put that into operation. I suspect Vladimir Putin has probably got a similar evacuation plan for himself if anything gets really bad in Moscow. So that's what dictators do. And Assad's supporters, those in his immediate inner circle who are still inside Syria, their life expectancy, I think, is not very long at all.
And let's cover also our last topic, Donald Trump's stance on global affairs on the international stage. We have heard new statement from US President-elect about the Panama Canal. What is your take on that? And do you expect any kind of US military intervention in Panama?
Well, US military intervention in Panama, Trump's team has talked of Panama and retaking the Panama Canal. Is talked of US control of Greenland, which belongs to Denmark. Is talked of bringing Canada in as another state of the United States. A lot of it's rhetoric. When it comes to Panama, I think what Trump will be doing is trying to set the conditions to renegotiate the price that US shipping has to pay in going through the Panama Canal, and try and reduce the fees that US ships will have to pay, and put political pressure on the Panamanian government to do that. And he does that by threatening. That's what Trump does. Canada, he'll be threatening Canada because Canada is one of those NATO countries that doesn't spend 2% of its GDP on defense. Never mind have the ability to up that to 3 to 5%. So that is where Trump will be pressurizing Canada, and of course Greenland. There's good military reasons for Greenland, with an increasing threat from Russia, to want to have additional military capability in there. Trump threatening to take that. What's Denmark done? It's put another, I think, $1.5 billion worth of defense capabilities going into Greenland. That will placate Donald Trump, and I think he'll be content that that flank is being better protected. So he's a bully, but he uses business tactics rather than diplomatic tactics to try and achieve his aims.
And do you feel that any kind of a US military intervention elsewhere around the globe would make the United States more stronger or more weaker from your perspective? I know, because it's like a hypothetical thing, a hypothetical one, but do you feel that such actions can make the United States more stronger or weaker on the global stage?
Yeah, I think it's not down to military actions. The military is an arm of diplomacy. So it can be used to pressure, it can be used to defend, it can be used to protect. And that's what Donald Trump will use his military capability to do. But there are areas which will affect the US economy and threaten US stability even more. And in particular, what China is doing around Taiwan and in Southeast Asia. And therefore, I think that we will see an increase of US military capability and military presence, and overt military capability around that whole area during Trump's presidency, because A, he doesn't get on well with China. B, he sees China as a huge economic threat and threat to the stability of the United States. So will want to deter Chinese aggression as much as he possibly can. That's why I think he will want European nations to take on greater responsibility in supporting Ukraine, and he will want assistance trying to deal with what's going on in the Middle East, because again, that would impact the US economy enormously if the Middle East continued to fall apart even more.
So you think that Trump will be able to deter China from invading Taiwan during his next term?
I think Trump's ability to deter China will in part depend on what peace solution they try to push onto Ukraine. I think if Vladimir Putin is allowed to keep any Ukrainian territory, and I'll include Crimea in that, then Xi Jinping will go, well, I'm going to take Taiwan, and it's easy for me to do that, and I can ride out the wrath of international condemnation for 3 or 5 years. And actually, the economic shock that there would be is going to impact the United States more than it's going to impact anywhere else. And Donald Trump will therefore want to negotiate a settlement as quickly as possible. And therefore, I think the world is in a very, very dangerous place at the moment.
And do you feel that Donald Trump would be able to manage these conflicts around the globe, end them all, and try to be a global policeman to manage all these threats right now?
I think he'll try. I don't think he'll necessarily have success. He turned around and says during his last presidency, US didn't get involved in any new wars and new conflicts, and he's right, but that's because the global geopolitical circumstances didn't start any. It wasn't down to his actions. During Donald Trump's last presidency, he killed more terrorists and other military leaders that were destabilizing places through drones and assassinations and other things than any other president has done. So, Trump, what he says and what he actually does are two completely different things often.
Thank you, Colonel Ingram, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.